those of you who are near to the sessions, my name is Reese. My day job is with New Relic, and I also do a lot of work with the OpenTelemetry End User Working Group, including hosting these sessions. Alrighty, let's see. Okay, let's start with this one. Does your role encompass being an enabler? How do you deal with helping in languages you're not an expert in? Usually how I run these is whoever put the topic or question in, if you can unmute and maybe give us a little bit more detail. Looks like Derek has a question on how do you define enabler?
Yeah, this one's mine. Happy to expand on this. So like basically the role I have in my company is kind of twofold. The first is like, maintain OpenTelemetry collector deployments and kind of be responsible for the data pipeline, receiving data and sending that to the various backends. But it's also like what I call the enabler, which is like being a champion for OpenTelemetry, driving adoption within the company, troubleshooting, helping teams troubleshoot issues that they have in their respective services, things like that. So like in my company, for instance, we're probably like 70% .NET, 10% Java, 10% Go, 5% Python, like we're primarily focused in one area. So like we build examples in .NET. I personally am more of like a .NET developer. My team is as well. A great thing about OpenTelemetry, in my opinion, is that like the concepts are extremely similar across languages, but like, I don't really know how to write Java, it's not too far away from .NET, but for instance, so sometimes it's like troubling for me to provide specific feedback or like look at a PR and like really understand the scope of everything that's happening. And I'm curious, like if teams have this problem at the companies that they're working in, do you try to like, create champions in those languages you're not familiar in, or, communities of practice around that? If anyone's experiencing this and maybe how you're solving for it. I hope that makes sense, Derek.
Totally. Yeah.
As a former enabler, I can tell you that my strategy was really to kind of first lead the way by showing how to enable observability, or within my domain of expertise, which at the time was Go. And as I was demonstrating the benefits of using OpenTelemetry, or I guess at the time it was open tracing, that if that gives you an idea of how long ago this was. But one of the benefits, as I was demoing the benefits, people would come and ask me questions, and a lot of the time these people worked in different teams and different languages, and they would be interested in starting out, but they wouldn't be familiar with the concepts of open tracing, OpenTelemetry. And so, my role, as I saw it, was to kind of pair with those people who were experts in whatever languages that they were trying to be becoming enabler in, and really work alongside with them until they felt comfortable with the concepts of the observability platform I was using. So I think that's kind of my strategy. It worked out pretty well. I think we managed to deploy things to like 3 or 4 different teams within the organization, and it worked pretty well.
Yeah, okay, cool. That's kind of, I guess, what I mean by like champion. So like basically leveling up, maybe individuals or groups within those like smaller subsets and then letting them kind of run with it. Do you find when you did that those people, as like, I wasn't familiar with open tracing, but like, as the spec evolves and as new features get added, do they come back to you? Do they seek information on their own? Do they jump in the OTel Slack channels and ask questions, or were they routing things through you in your experience?
It's kind of a mixed bag. I think some people feel more comfortable with just talking to the person they know, and so to a certain extent I became a bit of a router for questions. But I did see a couple of people who were really into talking to the community directly, and so they just went into the Slack channels or reach out to people directly in GitHub or whatever. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think at some point as you direct people to specific issues in GitHub or specific spec changes, people tend to get more comfortable with the idea that they can go there themselves. But yeah.
Cool. And then maybe one more follow-up, if you don't mind. Like, how long would you say like it took for those individuals you worked with to like, I don't know, get up to speed, whatever that means in your opinion? You know, was that like a matter of weeks? Was that like a longer period? You know, how would you gauge like how easy it was for them to sort of like understand the domain when it is maybe not their like primary focus?
Yeah. Again, sorry to give you maybe a mixed answer, but it depended on individuals. I think some people who are really keen on trying to learn new ways of doing things were really excited about the prospect of trying out you know, something new, and then, you know, those people kind of got up to speed a lot faster. The people that were, you know, maybe more used to doing things a certain way took a little bit longer. And then, you know, if I'm honest, I think some people, you know, I was trying to get distributed tracing adopted. Some people just never really understood what the benefits were. And I think that, you know, it really is a mixed bag. So it really depends on where people are in your organizations and how resistant to change they are, I think.
Yeah, cool. No, thank you. I appreciate that, because I feel like we struggle with sometimes exactly that. Like, they don't really understand the purpose, or they don't understand how it maybe has value outside of their individual team, you know, like when we start connecting services or something. So just trying to, you know, come up with any insight I can into like improving like the culture and that sort of thing. So appreciate the response.
Yeah, I think, I think it's really hard to take someone from their day-to-day job, which, you know, most people are already kind of strained on doing whatever it is that they're doing for the business, and asking them to do more by, you know, heading off into this completely what kind of appears unnecessary aspect of their jobs, right? To implement OpenTelemetry. And it's not really until people have those aha moments of, you know, understanding how much better their lives will be in the future, that they can really wrap their head around the benefits. I think one of the things that I've really tried to help people understand is, you know, how do you get started as quickly as possible? And I think that's one of the main areas of OpenTelemetry that I'm really, really excited about, is all of the auto instrumentation work, because I think that allows people to get some amount of benefit without a tremendous amount of investment upfront. And a lot of the time I find, even if it only gets you 60 or 70% of the way there, it tends to give people enough of visibility into what their systems are doing through auto instrumentation that they can then like get excited about the prospect of investing more time in doing this work.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome.
Dan, I don't really have an answer. All I can say is I sympathize with you. As someone who like codes even probably a lot less than, you know, what you described in your role, it feels weird to kind of want to lead the way as an enabler for these things in your org without necessarily being the person who's able to kind of just, all right, let me do a couple examples for you. Let me kind of show you from start to finish how this looks. So I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out too. Probably further behind you, actually. So
in my previous organization, like when we were trying to bring OpenTelemetry into the development teams, we faced some interesting challenges where the teams recognized the importance of OpenTelemetry, but they were constantly fighting fires. So they didn't have time to instrument their code, which was kind of ironic because instrumenting their code would have probably helped them fight those fires more effectively. And so like, while my team was, their job was to be that enabler. So we, you know, defined the best practices and taught teams how to instrument their code. They kept trying to use my team as like, oh, well, you guys know this stuff, so why don't you instrument our code for us? Which we had to push back really hard on, because like, we don't know your code, so you have to instrument your code because you know it best, right? You know what the things are that you need to look for.
Yeah, I feel like everything like we're all talking about, like we all have like somehow are in the same boat, and I'm just it's like super interesting because I feel like I've experienced all of what you guys have said.
Yeah, what Agile mentioned is something that I'm experiencing as well, and it even goes wider than just one company. It goes even throughout the community. So some time ago, I tried to help a few open source projects to add instrumentation to their code base because I wanted to have good references of what other people can do, So I could then point other people to that code base and say, this is a very well instrumented application. You can use it as reference for instrumenting your own application. The problem with that was some projects they wanted to have instrumentation, but they didn't actually, they weren't ready for it, right? And this is something that I'm experiencing within the company, within other companies as well, is that we can try to be an enabler and instrument things for them, but if they're not ready to have their code instrumented, it's just not going to work.
Yep. I could, by the way, you sound a little distant. I was able to hear you. But just FYI. I think that's true. Like, I feel like first somehow we need to like sell like if teams maybe recognize the benefit earlier, like it helps in all these avenues, like it helps with them understanding the purpose and therefore like maybe wanting to contribute more or how to solve the problem. So maybe, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here and maybe like pushing to show more like, here are some examples where doing this solves some problems. Like if you're experiencing similar problems, and perhaps like this would be a really good idea for you. Maybe like, I don't know, honing in on that kind of a tact might be beneficial.
Yeah. So is my microphone better now? Am I closer?
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. So I just came from a conversation with another person that that person was mentioning something exactly like that, and one thing that they are doing and I found very interesting is they have like an observability group, and that group is the reference group in terms of observability, and they can watch what other people are, what the whole company is doing in terms of observability. And what he mentioned was there was one team using the specific programming language, and they found that one specific metric helped them recover very fast from an outage. So what the observability group did then was to spread that information to the whole company, saying, so teams were using that programming language. You now have to include this metric here. Otherwise, because that metric helped that team to recover very fast from an outage. So I see the role of the enabler here, like the observability enabler, as also to spread information, to get information from one silo and break the silo and bring to the whole company, or to the whole community for that matter.
Dan, would it be, as far as something like the community could do with this, would maybe some documentation around like real world cases like the one Jurasi mentioned, do you think that might be helpful if you could share like similar stories with your team?
It might. I mean, we try to do that already. I think it's like a combination of everything that's mentioned here. Maybe like, I don't want to say like what we're doing isn't working. I think it is working. It's just like progress is slower than I maybe would prefer,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I think like, having a collection of like good news stories that, or whatever you want to call it, like, like, hey, I work at company X and we were able to solve this problem and, reduce mean time resolution, blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, I do think like that, if people are like looking to get into the space, I think those are great. And I think like having those examples of like specifics, like as my role here as like in the observability group for my company, like I go and I read blogs and stuff, but I don't think like everybody at my company would do that. Like maybe they are reading blogs specific to like the .NET runtime or something, you know, I don't know. So yeah, I think it would help. I don't know what the best, I guess, format would be.
I'm just wondering, would it be beneficial to have like periodic, like some sort of forum where like every month or whatever, or every quarter, where folks from organizations that are looking to adopt OpenTelemetry practices, OpenTelemetry in general, have a chance to like interact with folks in the community for like a pointed Q&A, to like just to sort of, you know, ease their concerns, like, or would y'all feel like this is too much of an overlap of what this group already does? I'm just wondering, because I do feel like just putting folks who are kind of like not really sure about this in touch with other folks who have gone through this, or, you know, have some expertise in the area, can like put them at ease.
I don't know. My first thought is like it does have some overlap with this group. I mean, I think, I don't know. Maybe I would need to think about that a bit more. One thing, like Reese mentioned, like she's recording this meeting now, which I think is good. Like people can go back and like get insight into the past, which before I think was like there's some good topics here that are brought up that like aren't necessarily easy to get answers, because there aren't really answers. Like they're more gray, if you will. I don't know. I would have to think about that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very valid observation or concern. And yeah, I would like to noodle on this more as well. And that said, I just realized, well, I realized a few minutes ago that I haven't been time boxing this, so I apologize. But it sounds like we might be good on this topic. Dan, was there anything else you wanted to add before we move to the next one?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Can I hop in real
Oh,
quick?
yes.
Just share one last thought.
Of course.
This is kind of just a more general approach we're trying out at our organization, but we're kind of trying to drive change across various laterals through the idea of like a service catalog and scorecard for services, where various like subject matter experts can define like a set of standards in a particular domain that should apply for services, and kind of provide a rubric for those things. So what does like, you know, sufficient, you know, or like give a service a grading in a particular set of criteria, right? C, A plus, right? And you don't have to be responsible for implementing what does like an A look like in your service, but you're allowed to, you know, you can define those standards, and then the actual service owners that are responsible for that service can consult that rubric, that scorecard, kind of grade their own services according, and then kind of refer to whatever standardized documentation you provide as the subject matter expert for figuring out, okay, how do I take my service that is maybe a grade C in observability to like a grade A, right? And so in that kind of a situation, you're setting forth the standards, you're providing a clear rubric that allows service owners to kind of grade themselves, and you're providing more information if they're looking to kind of level up their service. So this is kind of something that is very new at our organization. We're going to try to drive change in a bunch of different places, things like SRA practices, how you tune your services in Kubernetes, code quality, test coverage, observability stuff. So we're just going to try that out and see if that makes it kind of easier to gamify making strides in just improving services and things like that. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but it kind of separates implementation from like leading the way in improving something.
All right, Derek, I don't know if you can see this, but Dan has put a thumbs up.
Oh, cool. Yep.
All righty. So since the next two have equal number of votes, we'll just go with the in order. Oh, there we go. How are you dealing with clock/time drift?
Yeah, these are actually all mine for today.
Oh, thanks, Dan.
Yeah. So like I don't know. I noticed because our backend doesn't accept data that's like in the future. I think it's 10 minutes in the future. Obviously, people are creating data points from the future because their times on their servers are not correct. One, I guess, are people experiencing this problem? Like the naive side of me wants to just say, well, like they should just fix their servers, which I do agree with. If you are experiencing this, do you notify services? Do you implement something in the collector to understand that it's happening? Yeah, that.
So I can probably talk a little bit about how Jaeger deals with that. And the way that Jaeger does or used to do is it tries to detect, well, so I guess the first realization is that clock skew is going to happen. And you just have to account for it. There is no way for clocks to be synchronous or synchronized, especially on a microservices architecture. And one way of dealing with that is, and the way that Jaeger does, is it first assumes that you don't have asynchronous processing. So one trace is very synchronous. So the parent span or the very first span ends at most when the last span finishes. So, and if that's not the case, then Jaeger by default will try to adjust the parent spans of that span to be as big or as long as the longest span that it has. It did generate a lot of confusion among users, especially for users who do have asynchronous processing. So much that we ended up doing a flag to disable this behavior on the Jaeger side, on the Jaeger collector side. And I think we at some point thought about not having that behavior by default. So only users who would know what they're doing would then enable the clock skew. I can't remember what is the feature name, but they would then have this clock fixing feature enabled. On the collector side, we're not doing anything that I know of. Perhaps Alex can share if he knows whether we are doing something like that there. But and I guess the short answer is the owner of the system that generates the telemetry data is in a way better position to understand the clock drift than any general purpose tool like the collector. So the collector cannot, it's not in a very good position to detect and fix this issue for you.
So yeah, great, thank you. So like I don't know, to me at least, and maybe this is not true, but like there's sort of like two use cases here. There's like a low or mild kind of clock skew where it's like, I don't know, a couple of seconds or something, and yeah, sure, maybe it makes the tracing viz look a little awkward or something. And then there's like the really bad, ones that are like, in this case, like I know they were like 10 minutes off. So I was thinking of like creating a processor that detects some, incoming data point that is like some like distance. I don't know what the right word is. Some, if it's more than 5 minutes or some threshold, like just, I don't know, create a data point that like captures, the service name or something, and like, just at least like identifies that like, hey, this is something that's like way out of sync with what we consider real time. I don't know if like something like that would be useful. Right now, our backend, there's no good way to like correlate like the error that our backend throws with like the data that's coming through. So I don't even know like what data is missing unless a service owner were to reach out to me. It could be specific to my backend, maybe my use case I don't know. So I was just like, maybe just like having more visibility into the issue would like be a first step. Does that sound like a weird use case? Like, I don't know, creating a processor that would kind of detect that?
I think it's definitely an interesting use case. If you could have a processor that just detects things that are out in the future. I would guess that the hard part is, you still wouldn't catch all of your clock drifts. I guess you would catch the very obvious ones that you kind of know about, that you've seen in the past. But
yeah, so I guess then that's like, I guess because in my case I'm like dropping data because the backend's rejecting it. It would be good to know that. But if there was like, say it was a 10-minute threshold and it was, I don't know, 3 minutes delayed and I didn't want to detect that, or I couldn't detect that, that would still cause issues with the interpretation of the data. But it would be like a secondary concern. Like maybe I should just shore up like the data loss, if you will, and then, I don't know, just be better at, having that like Gerasi, is that how you pronounce your name? Having like the service owners sort of interpret the drift or the skew, because they're the experts, like you said.
Are you talking specifically about metrics, or are you talking about any telemetry data type?
I would have to double check. I want to say the data that I was looking at in this case was spans. But in my opinion, it would be for any type.
Yeah, so for metrics, there are some metrics stores, like every single Prometheus-based storage will block new metrics that are from the past, so not from the future, I suppose, but from the past. So you would have a warning on some logs already because of that if you're using Prometheus. For traces, it might be relatively easy to find it out if the clock drift can be detected by looking at a trace, right? So by looking at the spans of a trace. And I guess it would not be too hard to make a processor that detects that. Now for logs, I don't know. I wouldn't even know if we would want to have something like that for logs, because you generate such a huge amount of logs on one specific server, and supposedly all of the logs on that server are having the same timestamps for things that are logged at the same time. So perhaps this, I don't know, perhaps this data, it's hard to think about logs in this case. Because it would be having a bunch of logs at once. And then you have to compare those logs with a batch of logs from another server, coming from another server on the collector. So your comparison base would be huge.
yeah, I guess my take there would be just do the simplest thing that would work, which in this case, if the log timestamps are still in the future, you could flag it as, you could create a metric that would at least capture that information. But again, this would only capture clock drift that's in the future. Nothing clear would happen if it was like drifting in the past.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, cool. Thanks for the input, guys. I'm good with this one, Reese, if other people don't have comments.
Excellent. Alrighty. Best practices for bifurcating data in a pipeline. For example, have a filter processor with positive and negative condition, clarity around fan in, fan out.
Yeah, so this is also mine, and I don't really know how to phrase this in a simple way. Maybe I'll tell you a really weird use case that I have, and yeah, anyway. So like I have data flowing, let's say I have an OTLP, I have a collector, I have an OTLP receiver, I have some processors configured, and then I have a backend, let's call it backend A. And then I have another pipeline, also OTLP receiver. Well, let's just say we're using metrics here. Some processors in backend B. So I want to like have, so the same set of data is flowing into both of these pipelines. And then for like pipeline 1, I want, say, just to have histograms go to backend A. And for pipeline 2, I wanted to have non-histograms go to backend B. Is configuring 2 pipelines like that the right thing to do? I was trying to like, it works. Like I have this configured, it works. I was thinking about like, is this the most CPU or memory efficient in terms of like, I'm not, I guess like the fan in, fan out of how like the receivers and stuff work in the exporters work. I was trying to like, understand if I'm doing it in like the optimal way. Does that question make sense at all? Is that a use case anyone else has? I hope that made sense.
There's a new type of component for the collector that is coming up, and that's called the connector. So so the collector right now has 4 types of components, right? Extensions, and then pipeline specific components like receivers, processors, and exporters. And there's going to be a 4th one or a 5th, which is connectors. So connectors, they can act as receivers and exporters. So you have one pipeline that receives OTLP, for instance. Then there is some processing, and you end up with an exporter. And the exporter for that pipeline is going to be a connector. Now the connector then connects with another pipeline, and as a receiver, right? So it's an exporter in one pipeline and a receiver on the next pipeline. So what you can do is you can translate signals. So you can translate spans to metrics, for instance. But in your case here, it would work in a way that you have like one receiver and then 2 exporters or 2 connectors as part of the same pipeline. One that is going to connect this data or this pipeline with one that is histogram specific, and one that is going to connect with a non-histogram specific with the other one. And then each one of those connectors would then be able to filter what is interesting to be passed through this connector and block everything else. So you'd end up with 3 pipelines in the end. So one that receives the raw data, one that deals with histogram data, and one that deals with other data. So this is what we have planned for the future. So the basic building blocks for that are merged already. So from what I remember, so Alex can correct me if I'm wrong. But the basic building blocks are there, and we're all looking forward to seeing connectors being ready to be used, because we have so many use cases in mind to implement. Now, what we have today for that specific case is the routing processor. So we have a routing processor, and it doesn't really work the way that you want here, but it works in a very similar way. So what we do is we route the data points based on their characteristics, and we route them to a specific exporters. But we do that by making another network connection. So it's very inefficient, but it works. So those are the 2 possible solutions for that.
With the router, I'll obviously look into this. Thank you. I didn't know about either of these. And maybe this is specific to use case, but what would be the advantage of like the router solution versus like having a filter processor that like, having the 2 pipelines and having the filter processor just like get rid of a, part of like the part A of the set or part B of the set? Would there be a advantage to either one of those? I
guess that would be a 3rd solution. Yeah, I guess
that's what I'm doing right now, and it's working. There were some bugs in the filter processor that have been resolved, so now it seems to be working perfectly as far as I know. I just felt like I was, because I had like 2 receivers receiving the same data, like I was doubling up on the memory that my collector was using. I haven't done any profiling, but maybe that's something I should do. But I'll definitely look at the routing processor.
Actually, take a look at the connectors, because I've made a very similar question to the author of the connectors on the PR that he introduced, and I think indeed the answer is that the connectors, using connectors, you would then only have one receiver and only consume only one copy of the data point in memory. It only keep one copy of the data point in memory. Let me try to find a PR, and you can get more information from there.
Okay, awesome. That would be great. Thank you. That sounds like a great feature. I'll definitely follow that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's neat. I hadn't heard about the connectors, so I'm interested to learn more as well. While Jurasi is getting us that PR, does anyone else have anything they'd like to add or ask while we still have 10 minutes on the clock?
I do, if no one else does. That would, if someone else, obviously, you go first since I've asked enough.
I think you're in the clear, Dan. Go ahead.
Okay. I asked this a couple of these sessions ago. I was trying to find, I had opened a GitHub issue. It was very large in scope, so I don't think I have any responses on it. It was about like understanding more about, I'll just pop this in the Zoom chat if you're curious. It was more about just like figuring out like how to scale my collector deployment correctly. And Jurasi, I saw that you had like a post yesterday that you posted on one of the channels that talks a little bit about that. There were some other things I had put in here, like understanding like when the num consumers setting, for instance, should be modified. I'm curious if you guys have any insight into, sorry, my dog, like insight into like when I should be, I guess, horizontally scaling my pod versus when I should be modifying the configuration of an individual pod, if that, or an individual collector, if that makes sense. Like, how do I, under what criteria do I use to determine one versus the other? Does that make any sense? It's probably a loaded question as well.
So are you asking like at what point should the configuration be relegated to the pod versus to the collector to handle certain things?
So like I have it like an HPA configured. So like as my traffic increases, presumably I spin up new pods. But why are there settings like the number of consumers? Like, should I be, is that purely for non, deployments that can't automatically scale? More so like when do I create more collectors, or when do I change collector specific configuration?
I'm sorry, I missed the very beginning of the question because I was looking for the issue. I found the issue and I linked here, and I linked directly to the comment that I've made that is close to your question. So you can read then Dan's answer to that. But coming back then to this question here, and forgive me if I'm missing some context from the very beginning of the question, but the way that I would see it is, the way that I would tackle is, if you only have stateless connect or components in your collector, you can then just use a specific metric and scale up or scale. Adding more replicas would be the solution. The other answer to that is, your workload, and you would probably have to think about that not only as in the scaling to attend the demands, like the load that I have, but also scaling to improve my high availability. So if a node goes down, what am I going to, what are the effects across my observability pipeline? So how would I want to isolate failures on my observability pipeline? So is it better to have one per namespace? Is that good enough? Or should I have a one per tenant, or perhaps a even within tenants in my cluster, perhaps I should have different layers of collectors. Because failing one specific branch of your collection of collectors is then not going to be so critical as something that is going to fail only. If you have everything going through one collector, then it's really going to be an epic failure at one point. I guess there's no easy answer to that.
Yeah, I know there's no like one size fits all. I guess I was just trying to so obviously like I have some some base throughput, that I want to serve, I get a certain amount of data points per second or whatever base, and then I get spikes, right? So I have to have a minimum deployment that can handle those spikes.
Yeah.
But then there are some connections that are, I think have sticky sessions. So I need to be careful about if one of those things bursts real high, then a given pod or a given collector, if you will I don't know, have to be able to handle that.
Right. So in most of the cases, you're going to use gRPC for the connection between collectors or between your workload and a collector. And the good thing about gRPC is when a connection fails, it will attempt to connect to another backend automatically. Right. So if you have your deployment done correctly, and correctly here means on Kubernetes, you would then be having a headless service, and your client would be then connecting to the headless service, so that the client has a list of known backends upfront. So whenever one of them fails, it just fails over to the next one. Mm-hmm. And so that's one way of dealing with the sticky session problem. So most of the connections, they are long-lived when we talk about the observability pipeline. So they are gRPC connections, and gRPC connections, they are long-lived by design. Which also means that if you have only 3 collectors at the very beginning of your life cycle of your cluster, for instance, and then you keep adding more collectors to that, but you don't increase the number of clients, then you're not going to see any effects until the clients reconnect due to some failure, right? So you're not going to see any advantage the moment that you scale up. You're only going to see advantages the moment things start to fail. And then you start seeing the other collectors receive some traffic, or when you have new clients. So new clients then be load balanced through the to the new nodes. So then you start seeing that. So I guess there's that. One other thing you may consider is sharding your pipeline based on the type of processing that it's doing. Right. So one pattern that we've seen before, and that I've recorded at some point, is having one pipeline per data point. So you have one metrics pipeline, you have one logs pipeline, and you have one traces pipeline, because the types of workloads, or the workload for metrics is way different than the workload for a traces. The way that they work is really different. So you might want to split by that. And you also might want to split by the type of processing that you do on the telemetry data that is being generated by your workload. So if you have more PII information being generated by nodes or by pods on one specific namespace, then it makes sense to have one collector on that namespace with a specific processor to remove this PII, and then goes to the next layer of collectors that deals with more generic data.
Yeah, so you're only affecting you're only slowing down for that subset of information.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. And then I know we're almost at time. So just harping on one specific setting, that num consumers thing, is there, when would I ever want to change that? Do you know?
I'm sorry. Consumers, as in?
Yeah, there's on the OTLP exporter, there's a, maybe this is too technical, maybe I should just open an issue just for this. There's a property called num consumers. I think it's on OTLP exporter. It seemed like I got better throughput when I increased it. And I was just wondering why wouldn't I increase that? Like, what trade-off am I sacrificing?
Okay, so I see now. So this is about the sending queue. This is a blocking queue, and the way that it works is whenever things are being sent from one place to another, from the exporter and to a backend, it's placed on a queue, and then things are picked from the queue, like workers. And this is, number of consumers is basically the number of workers that are picking things up from the queue. Now, I'm not the author of this component here, of this helper, but we had a similar component on Jaeger, and I can tell you by experience that we don't actually know what is the optimal value for that. You have to find that out by yourself. And it's complicated because in Java, for instance, the number of workers would be typically closely related to the number of processors in a specific, like CPU processors in a machine, CPUs in a machine. Now with Go, it's not like that. So one worker thread is not a thread, is a Go routine, which is not related to an OS thread, a Linux thread. So there's no relation between, or no very explicit relation between a number of consumers with the number of processors on a specific laptop or machine, server, bare metal. So you have to play with that number. I think I kind of played with this information on an article recently. And the idea is that the more, if you have backends that are taking very long to answer to you, having more consumers here means that you have more HTTP connections with the backend that you're sending data to. And it might be a problem with the backend that if the backend is having trouble with a specific amount of connections and you're adding more connections, you're adding more load to a server that is already overloaded. In that case, you want to decrease the number of consumers. But what it means is it is processing less data simultaneously, concurrently. So what this effectively means is it increases the concurrency of data being sent to the remote server. So in theory, it is related to the CPU, number of CPUs that you have. But at the same time, I think it is more important to the backend that you're talking to.
Okay. Yeah. So awesome. That's like super helpful. I think the main takeaway for me is like I should probably be doing some more specific testing around like my expected, like how much data I'm receiving and expecting to send to my backends and just, trying to optimize for my specific use case rather than like having a generic, this type of situation, you should set it to X, Y, or Z.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Really appreciate the insight. Thank you.
Rad. Thank you all. We are a few minutes over, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Dan, thank you so much for all your questions. Alex, Jurassic, it was great to have you on. And if anyone has any questions about these sessions or anything else they are curious, myself, Adriana, as well as Rin are all on the end user working group. So feel free to reach out to any of us on CNCF Slack. And for I just have to drop real quick, but Alex, since you wanted to see the kitten, I'm just gonna do a quick kitten show. This is Taco.
Thank you. Hi, Taco.
And all right, thank you all so much.